often miss you only after you're gone. Why someone who ignored your messages suddenly becomes curious when you stop reaching out. Why a person who took you for granted starts thinking about you the moment you disappear from their daily life. It seems unfair, almost irrational, yet it happens again and again. This is one of the deepest truths about human psychology. Absence creates emotional space, and emotional space creates obsession. It is an idea closely connected to the observations of Greene, who argued that what is constantly available loses its mystery, while what becomes scarce gains power in the imagination of others. Think about it for a moment. When something is always present, your mind stops noticing it. You stop appreciating the air you breathe because it is always there. You stop admiring the beauty of your hometown because you see it every day. Familiarity creates comfort, but it can also create indifference. Human beings are creatures of contrast. We understand light because darkness exists. We appreciate health after illness, and we often realize someone's value only after experiencing their absence. This is why some people become obsessed after a breakup. Not necessarily because the relationship was perfect, but because the absence creates a void, and the human mind hates empty spaces. It fills them with memories, fantasies, and unanswered questions. Suddenly, the flaws are forgotten, and the beautiful moments become larger than life. The person who was once ordinary becomes unforgettable. But here's the mistake most people make. They think absence itself is magic. They believe disappearing for a few days will automatically make others chase them. It doesn't work that way. Absence only creates obsession when your presence had value to begin with. If your presence was draining, manipulative, or meaningless, your absence creates relief, not desire. But if your presence brought warmth, excitement, confidence, or mystery, then your absence becomes powerful. Because people begin to miss not just you, but the feelings they experienced around you. Imagine a movie that ends with every question answered. No mystery, no suspense, no cliffhanger. You enjoy it, then move on. Now imagine a movie that ends with unanswered questions. Suddenly you can't stop thinking about it. You create theories, you replay scenes in your mind. You become emotionally invested. The human brain is wired this way. It obsesses over what feels incomplete. And people are no different. The more predictable and available you become, the less space you leave for curiosity. But when you have a life of your own, when your happiness doesn't depend on constant attention, and when you are not always seeking validation, something interesting happens. People start wondering about you. They begin asking questions. They imagine what you're doing, who you're with, and what occupies your mind. Have you ever wondered why people often miss you only after you're gone? Why someone who ignored your messages suddenly becomes curious when you stop reaching out? Why a person who took you for granted starts thinking about you the moment you disappear from their daily life? It seems unfair, almost irrational, yet it happens again and again. This is one of the deepest truths about human psychology. Absence creates emotional space, and emotional space creates obsession. It is an idea closely connected to the observations of Greene, who argued that what is constantly available loses its mystery, while what becomes scarce gains power in the imagination of others. Think about it for a moment. When something is always present, your mind stops noticing it. You stop appreciating the air you breathe because it is always there. You stop admiring the beauty of your hometown because you see it every day. Familiarity creates comfort, but it can also create indifference. Human beings are creatures of contrast. We understand light because darkness exists. We appreciate health after illness, and we often realize someone's value only after experiencing their absence. This is why some people become obsessed after a breakup. Not necessarily because the relationship was perfect, but because the absence creates a void, and the human mind hates empty spaces. It fills them with memories, fantasies, and unanswered questions. Suddenly, the flaws are forgotten, and the beautiful moments become larger than life. The person who was once ordinary becomes unforgettable. But here's the mistake most people make. They think absence itself is magic. They believe disappearing for a few days will automatically make others chase them. It doesn't work that way. Absence only creates obsession when your presence had value to begin with. If your presence was draining, manipulative, or meaningless, your absence creates relief, not desire. But if your presence brought warmth, excitement, confidence, or mystery, then your absence becomes powerful. Because people begin to miss not just you, but the feelings they experienced around you. Imagine a movie that ends with every question answered. No mystery, no suspense, no cliffhanger. You enjoy it, then move on. Now imagine a movie that ends with unanswered questions. Suddenly you can't stop thinking about it. You create theories, you replay scenes in your mind. You become emotionally invested. The human brain is wired this way. It obsesses over what feels incomplete. And people are no different. The more predictable and available you become, the less space you leave for curiosity. But when you have a life of your own, when your happiness doesn't depend on constant attention, and when you are not always seeking validation, something interesting happens. People start wondering about you. They begin asking questions. They imagine what you're doing, who you're with, and what occupies your mind. In other words, your absence activates their imagination. And imagination is often more powerful than reality itself. This is why some people remain unforgettable years after leaving someone's life, while others are forgotten within weeks. The unforgettable ones are not always the most beautiful, richest, or most successful. They are often the people who had depth, the people who could walk away, the people whose lives did not revolve around other people's approval. They leave behind mystery, and mystery keeps the mind occupied long after the person is gone. But there is a darker side to this story, because most people unknowingly destroy their own value by making one crucial mistake, a mistake that kills mystery, destroys attraction, and makes absence impossible. They become too available. They reveal everything, explain everything, and give unlimited access to themselves. And without realizing it, they remove the very thing that creates obsession in the first place. One of the greatest misconceptions people have is believing that the more attention they give, the more important they become in someone else's life. It sounds logical. If you are always there, always replying, always checking in, and always making yourself available, surely people will appreciate you more. But human psychology rarely works that way. In fact, the opposite is often true. The more predictable and available you become, the less emotional impact you have. This is because the human mind is designed to notice change, not consistency. We become excited by uncertainty, curious about mystery, and emotionally attached to things we fear losing. But when something becomes guaranteed, our brains slowly stop paying attention to it. Think about your favorite song. The first time you heard it, it felt magical. You played it again and again. But after listening to it hundreds of times, the excitement faded. The song didn't become worse. It simply became familiar. Familiarity breeds comfort, but it can also destroy fascination. The same principle applies to people. When someone knows exactly where you are, what you're thinking, and how you'll react every single time, there is no mystery left, no anticipation, no excitement. And without excitement, attraction begins to fade. This is one of the reasons why absence can be so powerful. Absence interrupts familiarity. It creates uncertainty, and uncertainty activates imagination. Suddenly the mind begins to ask questions. What are they doing? Why haven't they called? Are they thinking about me? These questions create emotional tension, and emotional tension keeps people mentally invested. This is not manipulation. It is psychology. Human beings are naturally curious about things they cannot fully understand or possess. That is why mystery has always been attractive. It creates room for imagination, and imagination often amplifies emotions. Consider two people. The first shares every detail of their life online, replies instantly to every message, and constantly seeks reassurance. The second has goals, hobbies, and a life that doesn't revolve around external validation. They are kind and present when they choose to be, but they are not always available. Which person do you think occupies more space in other people's minds? The answer is usually the second, not because they are playing games, but because they have a life of their own. Their attention feels valuable because it is not given to everyone. Their presence feels meaningful because it is intentional. This is the paradox of attraction. People often value what they cannot completely control, but most individuals are terrified of this idea. They fear that if they stop chasing, they will be forgotten. So they overcompensate. They text too much, explain too much, and give too much of themselves too quickly. And in doing so, they accidentally remove all mystery from the relationship. They become easy to understand, easy to predict and unfortunately easy to overlook. The truth is, obsession rarely grows from certainty. It grows from curiosity. It grows from unanswered questions, emotional highs and lows, and the feeling that there is always more to discover. This is why some people remain unforgettable long after they leave. They never revealed everything. They never made their entire world revolve around another person. They had depth, independence, and a life beyond the relationship itself. And because of that, their absence feels larger than their presence ever did. But there is an even deeper reason why absence creates obsession. A reason rooted in the human brain itself. It has to do with loss, memory, and the strange way our minds romanticize what is no longer available. Once you understand this mechanism, you will see why people often become obsessed not with what they have, but with what they fear they have lost. There is a strange contradiction at the center of human nature. We often fail to appreciate something while we have it, yet the moment we lose it, it suddenly becomes priceless. Psychologists call this loss aversion. The idea that losing something creates a stronger emotional reaction than gaining something of equal value. In simple terms, people feel the pain of loss more intensely than the pleasure of possession. This is why absence can become so powerful. The moment someone is no longer available, the mind shifts its focus. Instead of asking, well, what do I have? It begins asking, what have I lost? And that question can become an obsession. This is why people often become more interested after rejection than during the relationship itself. It's why an ex who ignored you for months suddenly becomes curious when you move on. It's why opportunities seem more attractive after they disappear. The human brain is not purely logical. It is emotional, and emotions are heavily influenced by scarcity. Once something becomes unavailable, our imagination begins to exaggerate its value. We replay memories. We remember the good moments and slowly forget the bad ones. We begin to wonder whether we made a mistake. And suddenly, the person who once felt ordinary starts appearing extraordinary. This is not because reality changed. It is because absence changed perception. Imagine holding water in your hands every day. You barely think about it. But imagine being stranded in a desert without water for days. Suddenly, water becomes the only thing that matters. Scarcity transforms value. The same principle applies to people. If you are always available, people unconsciously assume they can have your attention whenever they want. There is no urgency, no fear of losing you. But when your attention becomes limited, when your life no longer revolves around their validation, they begin to feel something powerful, uncertainty. And uncertainty is emotionally intense. The mind starts creating stories. Are they happier without me? Have they changed? Will I ever have access to them again? These unanswered questions are dangerous because the human brain hates unfinished stories. It craves closure. This is why mystery is so addictive. Think about the last time you watched a movie with an unexpected ending. Chances are you thought about it for days. Not because the movie gave you all the answers, but because it didn't. The unanswered questions stayed alive in your mind. People work the same way. The individuals who become unforgettable are often those who leave behind curiosity. They don't reveal everything. They don't make themselves completely predictable. And most importantly, they don't make their happiness dependent on being chosen by someone else. This is where many people make a critical mistake. They believe obsession can be created through games or manipulation. They intentionally ignore messages, disappear without explanation, or pretend to be unavailable in hopes of making others chase them. But forced absence is not the same as genuine independence. People can sense the difference. Real attraction is not created by pretending to be busy. It is created by actually having a meaningful life. A life full of goals, passions, and self-respect. When you genuinely value your own time, your absence becomes powerful naturally. You are not trying to create mystery. It simply exists because your world is bigger than any single relationship. And that is attractive. Because deep down, people admire those who are emotionally independent. They admire individuals who can walk away, who do not beg for attention, and who refuse to lose themselves in the pursuit of love or approval. This is why the most magnetic people are often the least desperate. Their confidence doesn't come from being wanted. It comes from knowing they will be okay, even if they are not. But there is a hidden danger here, because while absence can create obsession, not every kind of absence is healthy. In fact, some people misuse this principle and end up pushing others away instead of drawing them closer. So where is the line? When does absence create attraction? And when does it create indifference? This is where most people misunderstand the power of absence. They hear ideas inspired by thinkers like Robert Greene and assume the secret is to become cold, distant, or emotionally unavailable. They start ignoring people on purpose, delaying replies as a strategy, or pretending not to care in order to appear mysterious. But this is not power. It is insecurity wearing a mask. Real absence is not about creating confusion. It is about creating value. There is a huge difference between someone who is unavailable because they are playing games and someone who is unavailable because they are building a meaningful life. The first person creates frustration. The second creates admiration. One pushes people away, while the other inspires curiosity. Think about it this way. Emotional unavailability says, I don't care about anyone. Strategic absence says, I care deeply, but my life does not revolve around gaining your approval. That difference changes everything. The most magnetic people are not emotionally distant. In fact, when they are present, they are fully present. They listen carefully. They speak with intention. They make people feel seen and appreciated, but they also have boundaries. They disappear to work on themselves. They protect their goals. They are not constantly seeking attention because their happiness comes from within. And because of this, their absence feels meaningful rather than confusing. Most people, however, fear being forgotten. They think that if they stop texting first, stop explaining themselves, or stop chasing, people will leave. So they cling tighter, they overcommunicate, they make themselves constantly available. Ironically, this often produces the exact opposite result. The more desperately they try to keep someone's attention, the less valuable their attention becomes. Why? Because attraction is not built on neediness, it is built on freedom. Human beings are naturally fascinated by people who have their own direction in life. We admire those who are passionate about something larger than themselves. People who have dreams, standards, and a sense of purpose. Their absence doesn't feel like rejection. It feels like evidence that they are living a life worth respecting. And respect is one of the strongest foundations of attraction. Imagine two people in a relationship. One constantly needs reassurance, becomes anxious when messages are delayed, and feels empty without constant contact. The other loves deeply, but remains connected to their own goals, friendships, and identity. Which person do you think creates more attraction over time? Usually it's the second. Not because they care less, but because they have not abandoned themselves. They remain whole as individuals. Their presence becomes a choice rather than a necessity, and that choice carries weight. This is the hidden secret behind absence. It only works when it reflects genuine self-respect. If you disappear hoping to manipulate someone, people eventually sense the insecurity behind it. But if you disappear because you are genuinely focused on becoming better, your absence becomes powerful without any effort at all. You are no longer trying to create mystery. The mystery naturally exists because your life is rich, purposeful, and independent, and this leads to an even deeper truth. Sometimes, the people who become obsessed with your absence are not obsessed with you at all. They are obsessed with the version of themselves they became around you, the emotions you awakened in them, and the possibility of having those feelings again. Once you understand this, you will see obsession in an entirely new light. Here is one of the most uncomfortable truths about human relationships. People are rarely obsessed with a person alone. More often, they become obsessed with a feeling. They miss the excitement, the mystery, the confidence, the safety, or the inspiration they experienced in your presence. This is why two people can go through the same breakup and react completely differently. One moves on quickly, while the other spends months or even years unable to forget. The difference is not always love. Sometimes it is emotional impact. The people who stay in our minds are usually those who made us feel something rare. They made us feel more alive, more understood, more ambitious, or more connected to ourselves. And when they disappear, the emotions they awakened don't disappear with them. Instead, they echo in our memories. This is where absence becomes incredibly powerful. Because the human mind has a strange habit. It edits reality. It removes ordinary moments and amplifies emotional ones. Over time, memories become stories and stories become myths. The laughter feels louder. The connection feels deeper. The person begins to seem larger than life. This is why someone who wasn't fully appreciated while present can suddenly become unforgettable after leaving. Their absence gives the imagination room to work, and imagination is often more powerful than reality itself. Think about a perfume you used to smell every day. At first, you barely notice it. But months later, you smell it somewhere unexpectedly, and suddenly memories come rushing back. The emotions return instantly, not because the perfume changed, but because your mind attached meaning to it. People work the same way. Certain individuals become associated with powerful emotions, and once they are gone, those emotions become difficult to replace. This is why absence can create obsession, not because people are irrational, but because emotions leave traces. However, this truth reveals something even more important. If you want your absence to matter, your presence must matter first. You cannot create obsession through tricks or manipulation. You cannot force people to miss you by pretending to be mysterious. Real impact comes from authenticity. It comes from becoming someone whose energy, character, and presence genuinely improve the lives of others. This is why the ideas associated with Robert Greene are often misunderstood. People think power comes from controlling others, but true power comes from mastering yourself so completely that your presence becomes memorable and your absence becomes meaningful. The most unforgettable people are not those who beg for attention. They are the people who are fully alive. They have passions. They have standards. They have dreams that exist independently of anyone else's approval. And because of this, when they walk away, they leave behind more than memories. They leave behind an emotional experience that cannot easily be replaced. But there is a danger hidden inside this idea. Because once you realize that absence can create obsession, you may be tempted to use it as a weapon. You may start wondering how to make people chase you, miss you, or regret losing you. And that is exactly where many people lose themselves. Because the greatest power of absence was never about controlling others. It was about freeing yourself from needing them. Here is the greatest paradox of all. The moment you stop trying to make people obsessed with you is often the moment you become unforgettable. Most people spend their lives chasing attention. They want to be admired, desired, and constantly remembered. They carefully craft their image, analyze every interaction, and worry endlessly about how others perceive them. But this obsession with being noticed creates an invisible weakness. It communicates need, and human beings can sense need more quickly than words can express it. The more desperately you seek attention, the less powerful your presence becomes. But when you no longer depend on other people's validation, something extraordinary happens. You become calm. Your actions become intentional. Your energy changes, and suddenly people begin noticing you without you trying. Why? Because confidence is not loud. It does not beg for recognition. Real confidence comes from knowing that your happiness, your purpose, and your identity do not depend on who stays or who leaves. This is the hidden lesson behind absence. It was never about disappearing to make someone miss you. It was about building a life so meaningful that you no longer fear being forgotten. Think about the people who leave the strongest impressions on others. They are rarely the most desperate for attention. They are usually the people most committed to their own path. They have goals that excite them, standards they refuse to compromise, and a sense of peace that does not depend on constant approval. Their absence becomes powerful because their presence was authentic.